From Boston, Crockett's Victory Garden.
Welcome to Crockett's Victory Garden. I'm Jim Crockett, and I have a tip for you right in the first of this show. And that has to do with getting your peas into fruit about a week to 10 days earlier than they might ordinarily come. And that comes from cultivating them about a ½ inch deep. Pull some of the soil up in around the plants a little bit. An old secret on growing peas: cultivate lightly and cultivate at least once a week, and they will come into bearing 10 days or a week earlier than they normally would. Well, today we're going to plant some of those delicious raspberries, some strawberries, some leeks, some gladiolus bulbs, Swiss chard, endive, and we're going to plant sweet corn. You know the old farmer's secret on planting sweet corn: when the leaves of an oak tree are the size of a mouse's ear, that's the time to plant your sweet corn. And that's what we're going to do today. But first of all, I want to thin some spinach. If you look at this spinach, which was planted about 6 weeks ago, you'll see that the plants are rather thick here in the row. Well, too many spinach plants crowding one another might as well be too many weeds crowding the spinach. And so, the old adage in gardening, a plant out of place is a weed. So this spinach has to stand about 4 to 6 inches apart if the plants are to develop fully, and we'll get the best out of them. I know this breaks my heart, and probably yours too, to reach in and pull out plants like that to make them stand that far apart, but there is no other way. Those little things there, of course, are delicious to eat. They're just as tender as can be. All right, so thin your spinach, thin your plants, and they'll get better crops out of them. But I want to go from here right across the way and plant some leeks. And notice, first of all, that I'm planting the leeks down the bottom of a trench. Dug a trench about 8 inches deep, 6 or 8 inches wide. Put some of my great compost in the bottom of it, because leeks are unlike other members of the onion family. Instead of forming a bulb, they form this long stem, which is onion in taste, very mild in flavor, white in color. They require maybe 120 days for maturity. Excuse me, I started these plants about 6 weeks ago. 2 different varieties. One is an old-timer called Musselburgh, and the other one is a new one I haven't grown before called Titan. And I like to see you plant some new crop each year, so you give the new varieties a trial. Setting these leeks down in the bottom of the trench like this. Use your trowel, make a pretty good hole for them. Pull out your seedlings. Good root system in there. See that beautiful root system? Now, this is the kind of a plant that will truly grow. Get a good deep hole with your trowel. Set these leeks down so that they're at the same depth that they grew previously, and about 6 inches apart or 8 inches apart. Now, as they grow, I'm going to pull this soil from the sides like this in around the plant so that the stem will be buried underground, and that will be that real tender harvest that we make later on in the fall. We'll just go right along here every 6 or 8 inches and put in another leek plant. All right, now let's go from leeks, and let me see. The next thing we want to plant is some Swiss chard and some endive. Now, a little secret about, first thing you should notice, I'm sure, is that the soil where I planted the leeks was moist. The soil where I plant these seeds is dry. Again, an old gardening trick. You can always wet the soil, but it's awfully hard. After you sow the seeds, but it's awfully hard to sow seeds in wet soil because it gets gummy. Now, the Swiss chard I'm going to plant is a variety called large white bib. The individual plants will grow about a foot apart in the row. They'll get 12 to 18 inches tall or a little bit more. We'll harvest the leaves from the plants and allow the plants themselves to stay. The plants will grow until very, very cold weather. Some parts of the country, they'll even live over to the second year. Now, since the plants themselves are going to grow about a foot apart, there's really no sense in sowing seeds all along the row. I put a couple of seeds in there, come out here a foot, put a couple of more seeds, cover them over about a ½ inch deep, come up a foot, a couple more seeds, and cover them over like that. Very simple way. Now, when they come up, I'll choose one plant from each of those places, and that's how we'll have most of the thinning already done. Now, you should take, of course, after you've planted your seeds, give them a good drink of water. And this is one way to do it, with a sprinkling can or a garden hose. Get them wet and keep the soil wet and from that time forward, because the seedlings are very tiny and tender. Now, the next crop I'll put in here is endive. Now, endive looks very much like lettuce, except, and tastes something like lettuce, except the leaves are apt to be a little bit bitter. But I'll show you how to, later on in the season, I'll tell you how we take care of that. These plants are going to be about 8 inches apart, so I'll put 2 or 3 seeds every 8 inches. Cover them over with about a ½ inch of soil, and we'll then have beginnings of some endive. Just like that. You see, now I'll save from each of there'll be 2 or 3 plants come up at each place. I'll save just one. The real secret is that later on in the year, I'll make those tender by laying a board on top of them and turn the green leaves into a cream colored. Now it's going to be strawberry planting time. And I have here laid out a 16 or 18 foot row of strawberry plants using 3 June-bearing varieties. At that end of the row, I planted a variety called Fairfax. Truly an old-time favorite. I know that my father was growing this variety about 40 years ago, and it's still one of the most flavorful for the home garden, a little bit soft for shipping, and therefore you don't find it in the markets. It's red clear through, and it's just very, very sweet. That's a good one for the home garden, a mid-season one. Next to that, I have a variety called Sparkle. Late variety. The fruit looks as though they've been polished, with a little yellow seeds sitting on the edge of it. Again, a dark red, rich flavored one. Sometimes you can get these in the market, but very rarely. At the end of the row, I'm putting in a variety called Sure Crop, and well named. Anyone that plants Sure Crop is almost certain to get a good crop of berries. But let me tell you the secret on planting strawberries. You notice I have a spade instead of a trowel. Very, very good reason. I want those roots to go down deeply in the ground. One way to do it is like this. Put your spade in the ground, wiggle it back and forth so that you have a flat-sided trench. Now, when you pull that back, you notice that this soil is still the level of the rest of the garden. I'm going to set in a strawberry plant here. These are some just as they come through the mail. Let's look at the plant itself first of all. Your root system ought to go straight down, or it fanned out a little bit, and that's what we're going to do against the walls of this trench. Secondly, if we plant it too deep, as that might be, we'll smother it. If we plant it like this, it'll dry out. So probably the most important thing you can do planting strawberries is to be sure of the depth. And that's why I set the trench with my spade, because I know I can control the depth of planting just where the plant normally grows. Just like that. And that plant is now ready to grow. It will send out its runners all through here, and we'll have a nice bed which will give fruit about 14 months from now. Now let's go to some gladiolus. Now, you know, we call these gladiolus bulbs, but it's not really. It's just a bulbous plant called a corm. Lovely flower, grows about 3 feet tall, blossoms for a period of about 2 weeks during the summer. I would like a gladiolus to come again and again through the summer, so I'll plant out a clump now. A couple of weeks from now, plant out some more. A couple of weeks from now, plant out even more. The kind of a fertilizer they like is bone meal. Simply scatter some bone meal, handful full of it on the soil. I've dug this soil over before, but dig it over again with my trowel just to show you how loose this soil is. Soil preparation, guess you know, is the key to growing anything in your garden. The bulbs, about 4 or 5 inches apart. And you're going to say, well, how do you know which way is up and which way is down? Does it make any difference? Well, it really doesn't matter. The plants are smarter than we are. If you plant it upside down, it'll just go on up and come out anyway. But the concave part of the bulb is the bottom, and often they have the little sprouts showing. The key to planting depth is this: 3 times the depth of the bulb. So go right in here with your spade, make a little hole, drop it in about 3 inches, pat it down, and go right along and drop them all in like this. And they'll be up in a couple of weeks, just like green swords coming up out of the ground. We'll get some lovely flowers this summer, and we'll have more coming along on this border all summer long. Well, we have planted some gladiolus bulbs, corms. Now let's go up and plant some raspberries. Of all of the delightful fruits for the home garden, I guess there's nothing is more productive than raspberries. Raspberries are not the kind of a fruit that you find in most grocery stores because they are so fragile that they can't stand shipping even a few miles, and they'd settle right down and become mush. But for the home gardener, this is one of the kinds of things that you simply must grow. They should be off to one side of your garden because they make bushes which live for many, many years and will produce fruit year after year. Let's look at a bush here for a minute, and I'll talk about the life cycle. These canes grew in a nursery last year. If they had not been dug and were not planted out and cut back, these would bear fruit this year. The cane will die at the end of its fruiting year on the normal raspberry, and then the next year's canes will have, during the growing season where one of them is producing, the next generation is growing up, lives through the winter, and produces the next year. And so there's an alternating generations, new ones coming from the bottom to make fruit the following year. Well, to plant raspberries, we're talking about something where we have to prepare the soil well because it's going to be here for a long time. I put some peat moss in here, some 10-10-10 fertilizer, and some of my compost. Now I dig a pretty good size hole. This hole was 2 feet across and a couple of feet deep. And this plant, as you see, is the way that you might get them from the nursery. This is a variety called Durham, an everbearing raspberry. Let me stop for a minute to say, unlike the ordinary raspberry, which gives fruit in midsummer, this one will give fruit in midsummer and again in the early fall. Now, often you can decide whether you can have some of the June-bearing ones or the summer-bearing ones for your main crop, and have these as a follow-up crop, or you can actually get 2 crops a year from them. Not much to planting them, you see. Just set them in the ground, put your foot right down around them. These feet are great gardening tools. Firm the soil around. You see we have made a little depression here so that we can hold water. And what that is Durham. Then give a plant like this a good big drink of water. This is not as much as it'll get. I'll come back and give this more water later. But that's the everbearing one. Ordinarily, plants like that, or the everbearer, are cut down to the ground in the spring and allowed to fruit on the current season's growth. Now this raspberry I have back here is the ordinary type of raspberry, some I brought in from my home garden, a variety called Hilton. Very large, delicious red raspberries. I brought this in just to show you how the plants multiply underground. The clumps get larger and larger and larger. Before long, you'll find yourself giving them away, begging your neighbors to take some, and they'll be darn happy to have them too. Of course, you can spread them around your own garden very easily. This variety called Hilton. Many good ones. Other good one is Cuthbert. Another one is Latham. Old-time varieties. Great production from them. Again, just firm the soil around them with your feet. Give them a drink of water. Now, should one last point on cutting them back. Ordinarily, these raspberries would be so tall. They have been cut back by the nursery, which is correct. The plants can't support their full growth with the root systems that have been cut. Now for the fun of it, let's come over here and plant some corn. 2 or 3 things I should tell you about corn. I guess the first one is this. I've heard people say, you know, I don't think I have room in my garden for corn. And I want to disagree, because corn is so much better when you get the water boiling before you pick it. That corn is so different a vegetable than the kind you buy in the stores or even from the stands. It's just not in the same league at all. So I will find a place for corn. And let me show you that right along here, there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 varieties of corn. And I'll go over the varieties in a moment to tell you which I'm planting. But I want to concentrate on the soil preparation. Corn is what you call, old-timers call it gross feeders. So I dug some trenches in here, put some compost in the bottom of it. I added some 10-10-10 fertilizer. You see this 10-10-10, good rich fertilizer. We'll cover this over, dig it on up, and now we're ready to plant the corn, and I will feed it during the growing season, so we'll get some great corn out of it. Now I'm planting 5 varieties all the same day, but that doesn't mean that they'll all mature at the same time. For instance, here I'm planting a variety called Butter V, 58 days. That's what the catalog says. Well, I think they're a little optimistic, but that's a good early variety. Next to it is one called Sprite. Now that says 79 days. Okay, then we come to Butter and Sugar, 73 days. Wonderful, 84 days. And Silver Queen, 94 days. Now Silver Queen is a white sweet corn, and if you've never tasted a white sweet corn, then you have a real treat in store for you. The secret on planting corn is based upon the fact that corn is pollinated by the wind. If you make 1 row of corn, the pollen falling from the tassels at the top is apt to be blown to one side, and you'd end up with corn cobs without very many kernels on them. Remember that the silk on corn is the female blossom. The pollen falling from the tassels hit the silk, fertilize the ears, the kernels, so that you get full ears. To do that, instead of 1 row, I'm planting 4 rows of each variety, each direction. And just so that you could see these, I've dropped a little bit of limestone in here, just to demonstrate that this is the easy way. This is why we set them out like this. Now I like to plant 12 inches apart in each direction, a couple of seeds, just like that. These seeds are pink because they have captan on them, and captan keeps them from decaying even when the ground is cool in the spring. So all I do with my corn is simply take my finger and push them down like that, about 1 inch deep. And you couldn't find any easier gardening than that. Just push them in about 1 inch deep, give them a pat, and they're planted. Now corn is one crop I hope you will find room for in your garden. And remember that this corn is going to be out by early July. I will plant beans or beets or carrots or something else in this same space, so I will get at least 2 crops from this piece of the garden this summer. Now I want to talk about transplanting some pansies. Now you probably saw those pansies this morning down at the other end of the garden. They were some which I sowed last July outdoors, transplanted the seedlings into a bed in the fall. By October, the first flowers were showing. I waited until the ground froze hard. Then I covered the plants with a pine needle mulch to keep them cold over winter, not warm. They came through the winter beautifully. Every plant survived. And now we're getting to the point of setting them out here in the garden for their summer display. You see this blue one over here and the yellows. This is a sort of a central plaza where the cameras can get in and out. Now, all there is to setting them out, this is probably as simple a task as you'll ever encounter in gardening, is to make a good big hole for them. I want you to see what we're up against here in, well, it's a couple of plants together, but take it a single plant like that and see the root system we have on a single plant. Beautiful things. Now we figured out yesterday well over 200 plants from a couple of packages of seeds, which, maybe it cost us 50 cents a package or something like that. And a couple of hundred plants for $1 is mighty good economy in gardening. Pansies will keep blossoming for a long time in your garden if you'll do this one thing religiously. Watch for the faded blossoms, such as this one right here, and get rid of it before it sets seed. What happens is, if the plant sets seeds, it says to itself, well, my mission in life is fulfilled. I have progeny. If you keep the seeds, the blossoms picked off, the plants figure that they'll have to keep on blossoming and blossoming. Now, I want to go in and talk about New Zealand spinach because it should be planted indoors. But before I talk about that, I want to show you a type of cactus called an orchid cactus, botanically known as an epiphyllum. Strange type of a cactus which grows in a shady place rather than a sunny place. It has the soil should be moist all the time rather than dry, as you might expect a cactus to do. This is the orchid cactus or epiphyllum. That plant is about 4 years old from just a little section of a leaf. Now let's talk about New Zealand spinach. Before I plant it, I want to talk about the plant. This is one of the most interesting of your summer leafy vegetables. Ordinary spinach, as you know, in midsummer either goes to seed or won't grow at all. We have here a plant, not a true spinach given that name, because it thrives in warm weather. And the New Zealand spinach, planted indoors now in a little pot just like this. We soaked it overnight to give the seeds a chance to swell up, otherwise they're slow in germinating. Put a couple of seeds in a pot like that, peat pot. Be sure that you moisten them, because this dry peat pot will absorb moisture from the soil and the things will dry out. So this is your New Zealand spinach. It seems to me that the more you cut it and pick it, the faster the thing grows. 4 or 5 plants are certainly enough for a family. They will put them off to one side because they get 3 feet tall and 3 feet across very easily, and they're quite hardy to go way up into the fall until the time that the tomato plants have been killed by the frost. Also, this is the time, a month before you set them out, to plant cucumbers, melons, watermelons, summer squashes into peat pots like that. Put 2 seeds in a pot. When they come up, save the strongest plant. We'll set them outdoors in about a month. I want to answer a couple of questions today, if I can. Now, here's one that says, as soon as lettuce seedlings started indoors, break the soil, they shoot up 1.5 inches before the first leaves open. Then, when the leaves do open, the long, thin stems cannot support them, so they collapse and die. What can I do? Well, it's just a matter of not enough light. If you're going to try to grow them, you've got to have full sunshine on a windowsill. At this time of year, I would plant my lettuce seedlings right outdoors where they get the full sun, and you'll do very well. But lack of light is typical classic example. This person says, would planting a border of flowers around a vegetable garden help to keep woodchucks away? I wish I could say yes, but I can't. Instead, buy some of the small mesh chicken wire. That's the 1-inch mesh, 3 feet tall. Bury 1 foot in the ground and leave 2 feet above with your stakes around it. It'll not only keep the woodchucks out, it'll keep the rabbits out as well. They'll not so intelligent, but they won't try to dig on it. They'll just detour around and you save your garden. I have barely adequate light indoors for my seedlings. Would there be an advantage to speed things up by a move outdoors even while it is cold? Yes, there would. On sunny days, when the temperature gets up around 45 to 55 degrees, set your plants outdoors in the sun in a wind-protected spot, and it will really toughen them up. And they won't grow that tall and spindly. Bring them in at night, put them out again in the morning. Last year, my beet crop failed. You suggested the soil lacked boron. Your book suggested a 1/4 teaspoon of household borax in 12 gallons of water, sprinkle around the plants. How about sprinkling dry powder on the soil? That's a very good idea. Put some borax in a salt shaker and just shake a little bit along each side of the row, just enough so that you can see that you have put some on. You don't need a great deal, but that borax helps the beets grow, one of the crops which seem to need it to develop a good, strong root system. What are the important factors in growing clivias? I raised a clivia from a seedling 5 years ago. Individual leaves are now more than 1 foot long, but it hasn't bloomed as yet. Well, it usually blossoms in the wintertime. Your plant is just about getting old enough to do it, and I think maybe next year you'll get blossoms. Well, that's all that I have time for today. On next week's program, we're going to plant some parsnips. If you've never grown them, you're missing a good bet. Some Jerusalem artichokes, that all-America wildflower that makes a great vegetable. We're going to plant some roses, prune some roses. This is Jim Crockett in Crockett's Victory Garden. I hope you enjoy the program every week.